All right, well, here we are for I don't know which edition this is of Open Mic, though. I do appreciate Alexis joining us. She's with the National Association of Home Builders. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on at the national level and what they're working on our members' behalf. Remember, if you're a member of CWHBA, you're a member of NAHBA as well. So thanks for sitting in this time, Alexis.
Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate this opportunity. So I'm a federal legislative director for NAHB. I'm also the regional representative on our lobbying team for the state of Washington. So I just want to put myself out there if anybody ever has any questions, wants to reach out on a specific issue. I am your pipeline here in Washington. Please email me, call me, whatever you want. My job is to answer as best as I can. So happy to assist with any of those questions that you might have.
So as the regional representative, how many states do you cover?
So I'll run down the whole list. Basically, I usually just say the Mountain West and West, except for California.
Okay.
So I have Idaho, Montana, Utah, Arizona, Washington, Oregon, and Nevada. Okay. So pretty healthy territory right there. So it's mostly Region 13 and 15.
Okay, so you don't have much to do then, really?
No, not at all.
No.
I also handle specifically my issue set is workforce development. So that includes immigration, labor, OSHA issues,
okay.
Workforce training and education, and healthcare.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about what NAHBA is working on, the big issues right now. And one of the things we have followed and we've talked to our U.S. representatives about, and you probably have too, and some candidates, including Dan Newhouse, we met with him, Reichert, we met with him, and Dino Rossi, we met with him, and I know you've talked with each of them on occasion, but the Canadian softwood lumber issue, which is driving costs up, can you update us on that?
Absolutely, and kind of where we put things in perspective here at NAHB is we kind of said that the two top issues we have right now are the two L's, lumber and labor.
Okay.
And that's where a lot of, lion's share of a lot of our focus is going, just because that's where a lot of breaking issues, a lot of urgent issues are taking place. And yes, on the lumber side, that's an issue that I've had extensive conversations with your representatives about. We're just kind of seeing record lumber prices. Largely, it's a combination of issues. It's because of prices going up because of lack of enough domestic production. But with the expiration of the softwood lumber agreement with Canada, we saw a 20% tariff levied on imports from that country into the United States. And we've just never been able to produce enough lumber to meet demand here domestically, certainly not in the last 50 years. So there's always been a need for us to rely on foreign source lumber to meet our needs here. We've just hit prices that are kind of, as our economists put in very technical terms, crazy territory in terms of pricing. I think the average price, or the price increase on an average home as a result of the softwood lumber price increases is about $9,000. Right. That's huge. And I think the latest figure we saw for softwood lumber per board, 1,000 board feet was in, upwards of $570. And it was just the craziest time. It was exponentially increasing.
Mm-hmm.
They've leveled out a little bit more, but we're still in unprecedented territory. And that just means impact on affordability of housing, impact on the bottom line for builders and their material costs. And it certainly doesn't help at the same time as you're having tariffs on steel as well, which could be an alternative that some were considering. So it's getting hit hard on all sides.
So what's the future of this?
Well, we've been pushing, and thank you to anybody who called, emailed, carrier pigeoned their members of Congress on this issue. But back in June, we did a letter that went out to Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, asking for them to come back to the table with Canada. It was essentially a very neutral letter. We didn't take a position on the prior softwood lumber agreement or what the future agreement should look like. We're simply just asking people to come back to the table.
Just sit down and talk.
Yeah. And we had 171 members of Congress sign that letter. I know that it's a heavier...
Both sides of the aisle?
Both sides of the aisle. It was huge bipartisan support. And I know it's a heavier lift for your state too. You guys are a lumber producing state, so you do have a lot of pushback from.
You would think that, but we see a lot of our mills closing down, which is frustrating too.
Interesting. Yeah, but I've heard that, there's been opposition, and we were quite surprised to get it from the domestic lumber industry on our letter effort, considering we weren't taking a position. They believe that Canada had an unfair advantage in the prior trade agreement. Again, we're not here to argue that. What we were arguing is no one's talking about this. So there was a lot of pushback. And from your state, the sole standout member was Dan Newhouse, who went out on this and signed the letter. So if you have an opportunity to talk to him, please always remind him how thankful we are for his support for that.
All right, you hear that, members? He's our congressman, so we will definitely thank him for that.
And we now have a Senate counterpart that has just been blessed by the Finance Committee. Senators Inhofe and Reed are now circulating their companion version to the House letter. So same thing, same ask that we had last time around. Ask your senators to support it. Maria Cantwell, Patty Murray, we'd love to have your names on there.
It'll be interesting to see if their names end up on there.
It will be. It will be. We think it's going to be a heavier lift in the Senate, but stranger things have happened.
Right. It just fascinates me and some others I've talked to, because every small community I go to, every big community I go to, actually every community in our territory, and we have 46 cities and towns, every one of them is talking about affordable housing issues. And yet we have this thing that's kind of adding the pressure to it, along with a number of other things. But it's just a fascinating tie-in.
And one of the other things I want to mention too, the affordable or the rising cost of housing, and this will be previewed at mid-year meeting. Another one of your representatives, Denny Heck, chairs the Housing Task Force of the New Democrats Coalition. Right. We worked with them, and they put together a fantastic report called Missing Millions of Homes. And it looks at all aspects of what's leading to lack of inventory, lack of affordability in housing. And I highly recommend you take a look at it. It's on our website. Mike, I believe you have it. If not, I can email another copy. The final copy that they sourced a lot of material from NAHB. And there's going to be a preview of it at mid-year and some videos from Congressman Heck and others. But Washington's really leading the way on this, and he's done so much on this issue.
Fantastic. And just a reminder to our members, I've sent that link and report to you in the weekly punch list that we send out to everybody. So awesome. Absolutely, we've already shared that. All right, so let's move on to a new issue. And I mean, we've got a number that we're going to touch on, but a big one that's important throughout our territory is water. And there's some water issues at the federal level as well.
Yes. And I'm just going to point out two of them, and I'm happy to direct you also to Courtney Briggs is our lead on Waters of the U.S. rule, and Jessica Hall is our lead on the National Flood Insurance Program. But if you recall the awful WOTUS rule that came out of the Obama administration that we've been fighting for years, the EPA is still working to withdraw that 2015 rule. They hit some procedural snags. It could have been we had some recommendations of how they could have done it. I think they took the more difficult route in doing this. So they actually had to propose a supplemental rule to clarify some of the points that they made in an original rule to rescind the 2015 rule. So if that doesn't confuse you.
No, I'm confused.
2015 rule, they made a rule to rescind the 2015 rule, but then there were issues in that rule, so they made another supplemental rule.
Okay.
So the
I love government.
I know. Bureaucracy, man. So the comment period's open on that, and NHB's drafting recommendations. We hope they hear us loud and clear on that. Meanwhile, at the same time, they sent that rule to another rule to replace WOTUS to the Office of Management and Budget, which vets all new rules for review. And NHB is going to be meeting with OMB to express our wishes for what we want to see in that new rule. In addition, the North Dakota District Court is moving forward with litigation on the merits of the rule. Briefs in that case were due earlier this week, and NHB attorneys are still kind of combing through those. So a lot moving on WOTUS right now.
Okay.
So we're just trying to parse through the muck on that.
All right.
And hopefully we come out with a lot better of a proposal at the end of all this.
Okay.
And
Good.
on flood, if you recall, we had a bill pass the House last fall, and that included really extraordinary efforts on the part of Jessica Hall and others in our team trying to negotiate provisions out of the original proposal that were really harmful to our industry. So it was a good modernization of the flood insurance program. Unfortunately, that's kind of dead in the water right now. You should have seen an action alert go out this week to all members, one of these grassroots alerts, asking you to ask members of Congress to do something because the flood insurance program is set to expire July 31st. So I encourage any outreach on that. But I think what we're likely to see, candidly, is just going to be another extension of the status quo, just because we're going into the August recess. We got the election coming up.
Right.
So it might be just another one of those, kicking the can down the road kind of things.
So let me ask you this: and it's related. The action alerts that you guys send out. We have 3 congressional districts in our territory. What's the best way for our members to reach out to these folks? Is it phone call, email, letter? Do we need to chase them down somewhere, or what?
So sometimes personal touch works really well, but when it's just trying to, having worked in a member of Congress's office, what staff do is they aggregate how many people they're hearing from on an issue, and then they bring it to the member of Congress and they say, man, we heard from like 20 people on this issue today. This is kind of important. We probably need to take a look at it. So things like flood insurance, unless there's a specific thing that we're trying to flag and we need that personal contact to a senior staffer, emails, calls, these action alerts are great to do. But sometimes we will ask you to pick up your cell phone and call those members of Congress directly and try to get them on the phone.
Okay, good. Now, another thing we see a lot of, labor issues, which is kind of an important thing in our area. I mean, we've got immigration issues and that type of thing, but we have a lot of workers that come in, seasonal workers that help pick fruit, for example, or cherries or apples throughout our region, maybe even some at our wineries. So we watch these labor issues closely. We're also concerned about workforce development because our skilled workers are tough for our folks to find throughout our territory. Is this something you guys are watching too?
Absolutely, and this one's an issue that I could talk hours about since this is in my portfolio. But
that's good because we have several minutes left.
Oh, great. Well, workforce development really is I look at it as twofold. It's the domestic side, developing the next generation of skilled workers here in America to work in construction. And then there's the foreign side where we have a very real shortfall of available labor. And there's folks willing and ready to work in other countries that want to come here and earn a livable wage and are willing to do work that Americans just won't do or we just can't find to do.
Right.
So on the immigration side, you probably, if you've been watching the news, it's just been an exercise in total frustration. Congress has been trying to get any kind of even incremental reforms done on immigration, and they just can't get everybody together. You have such factional ideologies in specifically the House, where you have ultra-conservatives, ultra-liberals, and very few moderates in the middle. And if you try to get a bill done, you have to cater to the kind of fringe ends of your party to do it by party line vote. There's very little crossing over and doing anything bipartisan on this issue. So the easiest fix would be doing something for these DACA kids, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, those who came here, were brought here by their parents by no choice of their own. And the president has expressed he really wants to get this solved. Congress has tried several iterations of bills to do this, but they keep weighing them down with other provisions and they keep sinking. Right. We've also been advocating for, mentioned the seasonal workers. There's really no guest worker program for construction. There's some businesses, and I know some in Washington, certainly have looked at using H-2B, but that's a catch-all program, and you have to prove that the positions you're hiring for are seasonal and truly temporary in nature. There's no year-round program that exists. And, you have the landscapers, the fisheries, the maintenance folks all competing for the same pot of visas. So it's not sustainable for our industry. So we're hoping that despite the partisan environment right now, that we could see a guest worker program introduced and have members coalesce around that.
What about more money into like the trade schools and that type of thing?
So that's the next piece is certainly actually a very timely update for you guys. So our chairman, Randy Noel, is actually headed to the White House today. The president is hosting representatives, business representatives of all sorts of different industries there to both sign an executive order on workforce development and to ask these industries to pledge to train a certain number of workers for filling the gaps in our labor force. So we have some participants in HBI's training programs joining in there, and we're going to be signing the pledge to commit to training 50,000 new workers in the home building industry over the next 5 years. And what we do know about the EO is it's going to create 2 different councils, and one of them is going to be representatives of industry, local, state, federal, education, community representatives, everything like that, to kind of focus on how to get results-driven training programs in classrooms and workplaces. So we're certainly going to be looking at getting representation from the home building industry on that council.
Okay.
For funding purposes, though, there's a huge interest. I was at a meeting the other day, and I can't believe somebody actually said this in front of members of Congress, but they said apprenticeship and training is getting its sexy back. And I rolled my eyes, but the thing is, it really is. There's a lot of conversation about workforce investment, how to modernize our training systems, how to focus apprenticeships on in-demand careers, pre-apprenticeships as well, and what we can do to get people interested in the trades, in the skilled trades, in construction industry and manufacturing, all those different fields. So there's a real conversation about it. There's a lot of legislation floating around. There's a reauthorization of CTE programs that's bipartisan and sailed through the House and is hopefully going to move through the Senate soon. And there's a real focus, too, on non-traditional populations, as they call them. So looking at partnering with prisons. I know some state and local HBAs have programs like that. There's a real opportunity, and certainly the White House is interested. If you're doing anything like that, they want to hear about it. And also training veterans, huge interest in that. So there's a lot of discussion about this, and the labor shortage isn't going away, but it's finally getting the attention it deserves, I think.
Enough attention that we can catch up to where we need to be, because it seems like we're kind of way behind on this issue. We focus so much on getting people college ready, and quite frankly, not everybody is. I mean, you can make a really good living doing home building and that type of thing, and skilled trades, being a welder or plumber or whatever, my electrician, even just hammering the nail. So,
yeah, I don't think it's going to be happening overnight. But as people have said, and
I thought you had power.
Sorry, what was that?
I thought you had power. You can make these things happen.
I have some power, but if I had that kind of power, I would have solved this yesterday. Okay. But I can say that we have an internal task force that NAHB has put together on this stuff. They will be meeting at the mid-year meeting too on Thursday morning in Portland. But as you said, this is not going to be an overnight thing. A lot of the conversation in this has been it's long overdue. But we need to take a look at it now. We need to come up with solutions now on how to do this. I think our latest economics estimate was that we still had something like 243,000 construction job openings right now, and that there's an estimated almost 800,000 additional construction jobs that will need to be filled through 2026, I think. Yeah, 2026 across all specialties and trades. So it's definitely something that is going to demand action, demand attention, because otherwise the shortage is only going to get worse.
Okay. All right. Well, the last thing I want to talk to you about is DC, just Washington, D.C., and the political climate out there. I love going to D.C. I love working in D.C., and I'm just curious if everybody's just happy and calm and getting along and singing Kumbaya and that type of thing.
Oh yeah, we get our drum circles together and hold hands. Actually, it is pretty tough sometimes. We are at a level where there is real big tribalism in politics. Everybody's kind of circling their wagons in their own camp, and if you're not sitting by the campfire, you're getting eaten by the wolves. So you see fewer and fewer moderate voices coming out and crossing the aisle to do a lot of things on more the controversial issues, less so things that are issues that we can easily agree on. Like I mentioned, the CTE bill that's got wide bipartisan support and passed the House by voice vote, nonetheless. But you do see a lot of people kind of moving towards different ends of the political spectrum. It's going to be a tough November. I think there's not going to be a lot of big stuff moving, and I think that's a huge frustration. A lot of talk was happening a year and a half ago about an infrastructure bill moving.
Right.
As I mentioned, immigration's kind of keeps hitting a wall. Very little progress there because of the ideologies that are sort of driving those conversations. But you're seeing kind of interesting kind of things emerge where the Democrats, you have a lot of these voices coming out that are very, very progressive. You have the call to abolish ICE. You have other kinds of policies like that. And then on the conservative side, you have very restrictive policies. Interestingly enough, immigration seems to be a really big divider, cutting legal immigration, increased enforcement, $5 billion for the border wall. So there's a huge split there. It's right now, if you wanted me to call it what would happen today, I think that the House would flip Democrat. It's a long way until November. A lot of things can change. But right now there's kind of a wind at the backs of Democrats. But I think a lot of them I think both parties are inflicting a lot of self-inflicted wounds leading up to the election politically. So I think they're going to have to re-strategize on how they're doing this in the next few weeks.
And at the same time they're doing all this, they get to talk about a Supreme Court nominee, which is always fun.
Oh, yeah. I think realistically that Kavanaugh is going to have a pretty easy confirmation. I don't see any Republicans splitting here, and they even might pick up some of the vulnerable Democrat votes who have re-elections this November. Potentially the John Testers, the Heidi Heidkamps.
Really?
Potentially, yep.
Okay.
So it's interesting to see how that plays out in all this. And the Senate will be in through the August recess to deal with all these nominations that they have, including the Supreme Court one too. And just for your Washington politics to note where things are right now, you've got Dino Rossi running for Congressman Reichert's seat. It's a toss-up right now. It's rated toss-up. It could go either way.
And just so, I think you know this, we've endorsed him and we've held a couple of events for him, and we actually have a sign up in our Wenatchee office, and yeah. And
then interestingly too, also ranking on the list, we kind of go by this Charlie Cook's political projections is pretty good bellwether of where things lie. And Kathy McMorris Rogers is actually on the radar as a leans Republican seat. And Jamie Herrera Butler is likely Republican, but they're actually both still on his flagged list. So interesting to see where things are pulling to the left right now as far as ratings go in a lot of these races.
Really? Interesting. Because Jamie's one of ours as well. Small part of ours, but still one of ours, yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And of course, we love Kathy, even though she's just a county away. She's one of our favorites too. So, wow. It's going to be a busy year in D.C. then, huh? Taking next year off?
Oh, yeah. I got plenty of time for that.
Okay.
We expect a lot of new members of Congress that we're going to have to start meeting in January.
Right.
So we've got our work cut out for us.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming on and doing this. This is a little thing we're trying. I think this is probably the fourth one we're doing. It's a good way to get information to our members. And I see we have one member online, and I know who it is. I don't know if Chris, you have any questions or not, you can type them in, or I don't know if you can speak or not, but you sure could try. Otherwise, we'll just wind this down. And people watch this once I post it. It's recorded and we post it. So thanks for coming on, Alexis.
Thanks for having me. Here anytime you need me.
All right. All right. Well, you take care, and I'll see you in Portland.
All right, great. See you there.